Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I did a video not too long ago about uncomplicated fishing lures. They were baits that were very easy to use. You pretty much rig them up, throw them out, let the bait do the work, and they catch a pile of fish. Whether you're a beginning angler or an expert level angler, these baits work for everybody and they work around the country. And after doing that video, I thought I would do a follow-up video that I'm calling uncomplicated cover. So 5 types of cover that you can easily identify. Most of the time it's just visually looking for this type of cover and breaking down this cover so that you can catch fish very simply, very easily. A lot of this will work just fine for bank anglers as well because it's going to be bank related cover. But if you can find these types of cover on your lake or river, no matter where you're at in the country, there's probably a very good chance that there will be some bass living around them. So let's break this down very simply. 5 uncomplicated pieces of cover that you need to try to fish. The first one, and probably something that's very obvious to a lot of people, is docks. I don't care where you're at in the country, docks are homes to bass. Whether it is a dock that's got posts, whether it's a floating dock, or whether it's a dock that is like a marina dock, it does not matter because they all provide very, very good habitat for bass. Not only do they provide shade that they can get out of the sunlight from, they also provide very good ambush locations, and they generally attract a lot of bait fish and bluegill and panfish to it. And from that standpoint, the bass has everything they need by living around that dock. They got shade, they've got ambush locations, and they have forage. That's what you're looking for. So no matter where you're at in the country, your docks are going to be a major player. And honestly, it really doesn't matter the species either. If you're fishing up north, smallmouth like docks. If you're fishing down south, spotted bass like docks. And if you're fishing anywhere in between, largemouth like it as well. So from that standpoint, don't ever underestimate the power of your docks. Now, a couple of quick little tips with docks. First, if you're fishing a lake that's got a lot of docks, generally speaking, if you can find a dock that's a little bit more by itself, whether it's in a bay and it's an isolated dock all by itself, that's going to be a good place to look. Generally speaking, an isolated dock is much better than fishing a giant row of docks. The fish tend to gravitate to that one specific dock versus being able to spread around to all of the other docks. So there's one quick tip. If you happen to live on a reservoir down south and you've got a lot of docks that you've got a lot of creek arms in, a lot of times the best largemouth docks will be the back 3 docks in the pocket, but your best spotted bass docks will be your first 3 docks in the pocket. So maybe you've got a pocket that's a mile long and it's lined with docks down both sides. The back end's going to be better for largemouth. The very front's going to be better for spotted bass. Another really simple tip is don't just think about the dock always in terms of it just being covered. You want to try to identify the sweet spots under the dock. A lot of times it's going to be where your darkest shade lines are. It's also going to be where 2 sections of dock come together. So maybe you've got a T-shaped dock, you've got your walkway, and then the tip of the dock that makes the T. That intersection is going to be a prime place. Same thing for your floating docks. It could be where the walkway meets the floating dock platform. So you want to try to identify the sweet spots amongst the dock. But no matter where you're at in the country, your docks will be a very, very good place to look for bass. It is uncomplicated cover piece number 1. The second thing is bridges. No matter where you're at in the country, bridges hold bass. And this is there's a pretty specific reason for this that I think a lot of people don't always think about. But generally speaking, the bridges are going to be formed or created where there's more of a pinch point on that body of water. And generally speaking, if you've got bridges, that's going to be relating more to a man-made lake or a body of water that has some current flow going through it. So if you have a pinch point, because it's easier to build a bridge where you have a pinch point, meaning it doesn't need to be as long of a bridge, what that creates then is a good place that funnels current down And if you've got a place that funnels current down, that means you've got increased current. It also means you've probably got a lot of bait fish in that area. And anytime you've got bait fish, you're going to have bass that are there to feed on it. So not only do you have current with a bunch of bait fish in the area, you then also have potentially bridge pilings that can create ambush locations, and you also have the shade lines being cast from the roadway or the bridge top, which creates good ambush locations as well. So you pretty much have everything you're looking for anywhere you find a bridge. And a lot of times you also have like a riprap bank or something that just adds some additional cover. So bridges are always a great place to fish. It's one of those things that does not matter where you're at in the country. I feel like a bridge, not only can it be a good place to fish, it can be a good place to camp out because you have a lot of fish traveling in and out. So if you're talking about transition periods like in the spring and in the fall, you might have a lot of fish moving in and out of that bridge. So if you happen to be looking for a place to sit and camp and let the fish come to you, a bridge is going to be one of those best places to do that. So from that standpoint, bridge, number two, uncomplicated place to fish. The third place is again a pretty simple, obvious spot, and that is points. Doesn't matter if your point is a main lake point or back in a creek arm or back in a bay. Generally speaking, points are very high percentage places to fish. And there's a handful of reasons for that as well. One, it's an obvious change in contour lines, meaning uh, you're definitely going to have the opportunity for fish to push bait into those areas. They generally are made up of hard bottom. That's why the point exists and has not been eroded away. It's because they're generally hard bottom. It doesn't have to be straight rock, but a lot of times it's at least very hard packed sand, and generally at least gravel and some form of rock. And anytime you're talking about hard bottom areas, the bass tend to like those places as well. But from a feeding perspective, they create very good places to feed because you have not only the land coming out that the fish can use to pin bait, but you generally also have some form of good current flow coming by that point, whether it's natural current or it's wind driven current that's hooking a shoreline and coming around the point. You generally have some good current flow. And as like I've said a lot of times on the channel, if you have some form of current flow, they're generally going to be a pretty good population of bass there. So you pretty much just need to drive around a lake looking for points, and you're probably going to put yourself in a position where you're going to be able to catch some fish. Now, it's might not be the best pattern on the lake, but there are almost always fish holding on points. A couple of things to key in on that. One, generally speaking, your more defined point, meaning ones that come more to an actual point, are going to be easier to fish than say some of your big rounded points that just kind of go on for a while because they don't form the uh, same sharp contour lines that you'd see necessarily on one that actually comes to a defined point. The other is the ones that do come to a more defined point generally have more rock coming right off the tip. So if this is the tip of the point, this section right here is generally going to be a harder bottom trailing off into the lake. Therefore, that creates an easier place for you to key in on. And then lastly, like I said before, about your wind driven current, the more defined point you have and the ones that stick further out into the lake generally are ones that have better current flow on them. But uh, by no means should you be not looking to fish points. Points are good across the country, and they're a very uncomplicated place to go identify and to fish. So that's the third uncomplicated piece of cover. A fourth one is riprap. Pretty much anywhere you go, riprap is a good fish holding piece of cover. Generally speaking, you want the riprap to come into the water more than a few feet, meaning, in some cases you have riprap that ends basically right at the water level and then turns into sand. Those aren't necessarily the best. Generally, what you're looking for is to have riprap that really trails off several feet or more into the water column. And that's because the riprap is a good place to hold fish because it provides good ambush locations because the fish can get tucked in behind some rocks. You generally have some good crayfish that live in those areas, so there's more forage species. A lot of times you do have current flow because the riprap is a man-made structure, meaning it's been put there generally to prevent erosion. And current is one of the major forms of erosion. So your high current flow areas are generally going to have your riprap, whether that's where a bridge is, maybe you've got an outside channel bend where there was some put down, maybe you're talking about the front of an island, the top end of an island where you have current hitting it directly. Maybe it's just a place that, ends up being like a big long causeway. But the thing with riprap is it does a really good job at funneling fish, meaning fish will get on a bank and they generally run left or they run right until they get around the riprap. Lake Gunnersville is a perfect example of this. Most of the bridges on that lake are bridges with about a mile of riprap. So if the fish are trying to move from one area to the other during a transition period, they hit the riprap, run down it, get through the bridge, and then they can proceed further back into the creek. But what that riprap does is it acts as a funnel, meaning it's funneling fish right to those bridges. And the fish tend to really like it. Now, if you're talking about fishing during cold water periods, the riprap does a great job at absorbing heat. And therefore, you're talking about areas that are maybe a little bit warmer than surrounding water. And therefore, bass, being cold-blooded creatures, are attracted to those areas that are producing more warmth. So generally speaking, your riprap areas are always going to be a good high percentage place to fish. They could be just put on somebody's personal shoreline. They could be a 2 mile long stretch of it that's creating some sort of causeway. But in either case, very good places to fish. The last uncomplicated structure to fish or uncomplicated area to fish is your dams. Now, whether you're fishing upstream or downstream of the dam, you're talking about very simple, good places to fish. So let's start on the downstream side. If you're fishing below the dam, you're talking about a discharge of some form. Now, I want to stress, if you're fishing below the dams, you got to make sure you're fishing safely, life jackets, all of that, because it can be rapid, fast water. But the point here is anytime you've got a discharge coming out, you have a lot of fish that are attracted to that. So you have a lot of fish that are generally holding below dams because they provide great places to feed. That's one of the areas where you have the most current. You have a lot of bait fish. You usually have a little bit of deeper water, fast moving water. It attracts a lot of fish. So the downstream side of dams can be great places to fish, but the upstream side can be as well, because generally speaking, what you have is some current that's being pulled in that area because they're pulling the water from the top end, the lake portion, shoving it through and discharging it down into the river below. So there's usually going to be some good key areas to fish. You usually have some riprap in those areas, maybe some cement pilings or barge tie-ups, something along the lines of some man-made cover. And if you've got current coming by man-made cover, generally speaking, you've got really good places to fish because they're good fish ambush locations. So again, anytime you have the capability to fish around a dam from shore or in a boat, you're probably talking about an area that's got a lot of fish in it. So those are my 5 uncomplicated pieces of cover, areas to look to fish. We're talking docks, bridges, points, riprap, dams. Those are all very easily identifiable and generally hold a lot of fish. So if you're looking for a good way, a good place to start, and you're looking for a place to potentially catch a big fish, all of those are very good places to look. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.